everyone. Have you ever found yourself listening to someone speaking English, maybe, in a movie or a favorite podcast, or even just hearing someone chat, and you just felt that little spark of admiration?
hmm
You hear how incredibly smooth they sound, how effortless, how, well, natural it all seems, and you think, wow, I wish I could capture just a bit of that in my own English. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, absolutely. That feeling is something I think almost every language learner experiences at some point. It's a really common aspiration, yeah. And you've hit on something crucial there.
Yeah,
Sounding natural isn't purely about having like a massive vocabulary or flawless grammar, though of course those are important tools, don't get me wrong.
sure.
But it's something deeper. It involves a certain rhythm, a particular kind of flow, and a whole host of subtle things in pronunciation and phrasing that are often quite different from the, let's say, carefully constructed sentences you might find in a textbook.
Right, like textbook English versus real English.
Exactly. It's more about the authentic cadence of the language,
Yeah.
as it's actually spontaneously used by native speakers day in, day out.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we've been, well, immersing ourselves in some really fascinating source material that gets right to the heart of this specific challenge.
Hmm.
It's basically a guide focused specifically on how to learn from native speakers in a very targeted way, aiming to help you sound more natural, build that fluency, and ultimately speak with, greater confidence.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found really empowering that the source material highlights is that you don't necessarily need to pack your bags and move halfway across the world to achieve this.
That's precisely the core premise that our source material lays out.
Yeah.
And it's quite encouraging, I think. While immersion, living in an English-speaking country, is undoubtedly beneficial. Nobody's denying that.
Right.
The belief that it's the only path to reaching this level of naturalness isn't necessarily true anymore, especially in our digital age. With the right techniques, the right focus, you can effectively bring a significant chunk of that immersive learning experience to you, wherever you happen to be. The objective, as the source puts it, is specifically to train two key things. Your ear, to really hear all those subtle nuances we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And just as importantly, your mouth, your tongue, your voice, your whole articulatory system to actually produce them accurately and smoothly.
So training the input and the output, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
So,
Listening and speaking, but in a very specific, targeted way.
okay, so what exactly are we going to unpack from this source material today? Let's give everyone a roadmap. We're going to start by looking at what the source tells us about how to listen effectively. And I mean, really listen, going beyond just understanding the gist, learning how to listen almost like a linguistic detective.
Right. Active observation. Then we'll delve into a really powerful active technique. The source recommends specifically for copying native pronunciation and that crucial element of rhythm. It's a method that kind of works like physical training, actually, for your speaking muscles.
Ooh, intriguing. Okay. We'll also explore how to actively build your ability to understand and, crucially, use the real-life, everyday phrases. The kind of stuff native speakers genuinely use in conversation, moving beyond those sometimes stiff textbook examples.
Totally. And just as important as knowing what to do, we need to look at the other side. We'll examine some common pitfalls, some mistakes. The source material explicitly warns learners against things that can actually slow you down or hinder your progress towards sounding more natural.
Good point. Avoiding the traps is key. Finally, we'll touch on a really interesting point the source makes about how your speaking style isn't just about clear communication, but how it connects to cultural expectations and, how people might perceive you based on how you sound.
Yeah, the social side of it. And of course, we won't leave you hanging. We'll wrap up with a practical challenge directly from the source material, something concrete you can actually try out pretty much straight away. It's quite a comprehensive approach outlined in the source, really. It covers both the receptive skills, the listening, and the productive skills to speaking, with very practical strategies.
All right, then. Sounds like a plan. It's time to dive in and really extract these key insights. Let's unpack this fascinating material.
Let's get into it. Sounds good.
Okay, so the very first thing our source material emphasizes, and it presents this as the absolute foundational skill, the starting point for sounding natural. It's all about how we listen. It makes this really crucial distinction. Don't just passively listen to understand the general meaning, the main points. You need to actively observe.
Observe. That's the key word.
Yeah, observe. This distinction feels really key. What exactly does the source mean by observe in this context? It means consciously paying attention to all those little details beyond the straightforward vocabulary and grammar.
Mm.
Things like the tone of voice the speaker uses, the overall rhythm and musicality of their speech, where they put the emphasis or stress within sentences, and maybe most crucially, how words connect and blend together when people speak naturally, especially at a conversational pace.
That focused observation is absolutely critical because, as the source material points out very clearly, and as anyone learning a language notices, native spoken English often just doesn't sound like the written form you see on a page.
Right, not at all sometimes.
You don't usually hear distinct, clear pauses between every single word, as if someone's reading aloud from a script very carefully, separating each word with a space. Instead, words flow into one another, they connect, they blend. This whole phenomenon is what linguists call connected speech.
Connected speech, okay.
And it is arguably one of the biggest factors contributing to why native speakers can often sound like they're speaking incredibly quickly, or maybe even running their words together from a learner's perspective.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that listening sometimes. Like, whoa, slow down.
Exactly. And if you aren't consciously training your ear to detect and process this connected speech, these links and blends and reductions, native speakers might indeed sound like they're mumbling or rushing or even skipping sounds entirely. It makes them genuinely difficult to fully understand, let alone trying to sound like them yourself.
Okay, so understanding connected speech is vital for comprehension too, not just production.
Absolutely vital. You can't really separate the two effectively.
Let's look at a couple of classic examples the source material uses to really illustrate this point about connected speech. These are really common ones. The first is the question, what are you doing? Now, if you were to read that sentence aloud very slowly, pronouncing each word separately and distinctly, like, what are you doing? Well, it would sound pretty unnatural and stiff in most casual, everyday situations, wouldn't it?
Totally unnatural, almost robotic.
So how might a native speaker actually say this in a relaxed, everyday kind of chat?
Well, as the source material vividly illustrates, in natural, casual speech, this phrase very often transforms into something that sounds much more like, what you doing? Or maybe even what you doing?
What you doing? Or that what you doing?
Okay, let's break down that transformation a bit, because it's incredibly revealing about how connected speech works. The phrase, what are you, isn't typically pronounced as three separate, equally stressed words.
Right.
The end of what and the beginning of are tend to blend together, and that test sound at the end of what. It frequently undergoes a change, especially in American English. It can become what's called a flap sound, which is similar to a soft toe, or it might even disappear entirely, particularly when it's followed by a vowel sound or that ye-sounding u.
Ah, okay, so the tie changes.
Yeah, the softens or links. Then the phrase are you can reduce significantly. It often gets squished down to sound something like cha or ya.
Like in whatcha.
Exactly. So what are you becomes whatcha or wadaya. And then the word doing. Well, in the very common informal speech, that final G sound is frequently dropped. So doing becomes doing. Put it all together, what you doing.
Wow. That transformation is huge. It sounds so incredibly different from just stringing together the individual words, what are you doing? Why does that actually happen in natural speech? Is it just, people being lazy or sloppy with their pronunciation?
Not at all. And the source material implicitly pushes back against that common misconception. It's really not about laziness. It's primarily about efficiency and achieving a smooth flow in rapid, connected speech.
Efficiency? How so?
Think about the physical movements required for your mouth, your tongue, your lips, your vocal cords to produce each sound. It's significantly easier and faster from a purely physical standpoint to transition smoothly between sounds when they are linked or blended together, rather than making a complete stop after each word, maybe fully articulating a final consonant, and then starting the next word from scratch.
Okay, so it's physically easier to link them.
Yeah, consider the muscular effort involved in stopping and starting the airflow and articulation for what stop are, stop, you stop doing. Compare that to allowing the sounds to flow more continuously into what you're doing. The connected version requires less abrupt muscular effort and allows for a much smoother, faster stream of air and sound. It's physiologically more economical when speaking at speed.
That makes a lot of sense from a physical perspective.
And here's a critical point the source helps us understand. Learning to hear these transformations, learning to recognize what you're doing as what are you doing, is just as vital for understanding native speakers in real-time conversation as it is for eventually sounding like them yourself.
Right. Because if your ear is rigidly expecting to hear, what are you doing? pronounced perfectly word by word, but you consistently hear, "What you doing?" flying past. You're going to struggle to keep up, aren't you? You might miss the question entirely.
Precisely. Your brain has to decode that sound stream accurately, and recognizing these common patterns is essential for that decoding.
Okay, that example really clarifies connected speech. The source gives another classic example of reduction and connection. The phrase, "I don't know."
Another extremely common one.
If you pronounced every sound clearly, meticulously, it would be, "I don't know." But how is that typically said naturally in casual, everyday speech?
Well, very often, probably most of the time in casual contexts, it reduces significantly to something that sounds like, I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, I hear that all the time.
And here again, the reduction is quite profound if you analyze it. That to sound at the end of don't is very frequently dropped entirely, especially when it's followed by another consonant sound, like the K sound, which is silent in pronunciation, but the spelling indicates a consonant start at the beginning of no.
So the T just disappears.
Often, yes, or it's greatly reduced, sometimes becoming a glottal stop. And the vowel sound in don't can also change or become less distinct, more centralized, what linguists call reduction to schwa or near schwa. No itself is pronounced simply as no. So when you put the reduced don't, like done, and no together rapidly, what you often get is something very close to dunno.
I don't know.
The source uses these specific, very common examples, what you doing, I don't know, precisely because they are such universal illustrations of how connected speech and sound reduction aren't just occasional exceptions. They are fundamental core features of natural conversational English. They happen constantly.
Okay.
And listening attentively for these kinds of changes, these links, these drop sounds, these transformations, is absolutely key to first deciphering and then eventually being able to produce rapid, natural-sounding speech yourself.
So the source material is really hammering home this fundamental point, isn't it? When you're engaging with any kind of spoken English, whether you're watching a movie, listening to a podcast like this one, or hopefully having a real conversation with a native speaker, you need to consciously switch your listening focus sometimes.
Right.
Don't just aim to get the main idea, the plot points, or the key vocabulary words, although that's important too, obviously, but make a deliberate effort to pay close attention to how the words are actually being linked together, how the individual sounds might change or even disappear completely in that stream of connected speech, and also listen for the overall musicality, the rhythm, the stress patterns of the sentence.
Yeah, it's like becoming a detective, specifically for the sounds of the language. Analyzing the soundscape, you could say, as much as analyzing the meaning.
I like that, analyzing the soundscape.
It's about elevating your listening from just simple comprehension, which is often the first goal, to a more detailed analysis of the actual pronunciation mechanics happening beneath the surface. This refined observational skill, this ability to really hear these details, is presented by the source as the indispensable first step. It's the foundation for everything else on the journey toward sounding more natural. You simply can't produce the sounds accurately if you can't first perceive them accurately.
You have to hear it to say it. It makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
Okay, so once we've started training our ears to observe these fine-grained details in native speech, how words connect, how sounds change, the rhythm, the intonation, the next logical step, according to the source material, is to move from passive observation to active practice.
Right, time to actually do something with that observation.
And they introduce and strongly recommend a technique called shadowing. Now, this name might sound a bit mysterious or maybe even deceptively simple, like just copying someone. But the source suggests it is an incredibly powerful tool for improving your spoken English, potentially quite quickly if done right.
Shadowing is essentially what the name implies, really.
Mm-hmm.
You are attempting to act as a kind of shadow to a native speaker's voice.
Okay.
You listen to their speech, typically a short clip of it, and you try to speak along with them, ideally at almost exactly the same time, or perhaps just milliseconds behind them, almost like a simultaneous echo. You're mirroring them in real time.
Right, like trying to talk right over them, but matching them.
Pretty much, yeah. That's the core idea.
The source material is very practical here, which is great. It breaks down the shadowing process into clear, actionable steps. Step 1, it says, choose a short audio clip. They suggest picking something you genuinely find interesting. Maybe a scene from a favorite TV show, a segment from a podcast you like, or a short YouTube video. Why does the source specifically recommend starting with short clips? Why not just shadow a whole episode?
Starting short is absolutely crucial, especially when you're new to the technique of shadowing. When you shadow, you're trying to focus on a lot of different complex elements simultaneously. You're trying to keep up with the speaker's speed. You're trying to match their intonation patterns, the ups and downs of their voice. You're trying to replicate the rhythm and stress, and you're attempting to reproduce those specific sound connections and reductions we just talked about.
Wow. Okay, that is a lot to juggle at once.
It really is. Trying to do all of that accurately for a long speech or an entire podcast episode right from the beginning would likely be completely overwhelming and probably quite frustrating and unproductive.
Yeah, I can see that. You just get lost.
Exactly. So starting with just a single sentence or maybe two, or perhaps a short clip of, say, 30 seconds or a minute at most initially, allows you to concentrate intensely on those specific nuances of sound, rhythm, and intonation within a manageable chunk. You can really focus without getting mentally exhausted or feeling like you're constantly falling hopelessly behind the speaker. It's about quality and deep focus over sheer quantity, especially at the start.
Got it. Keep it short, keep it focused, keep it manageable, especially at first. Okay, step 2, according to the source. Listen to just one sentence or maybe a very short phrase from that chosen clip, then pause the audio and then try your absolute best to repeat it exactly. And the source really emphasizes that word exactly. What exactly are we trying to match in this pause and repeat step?
This step, the listen, pause, repeat cycle, is where that detailed observational listening skill we discussed in the first section really pays off immensely. You're not merely trying to repeat the words from memory, like recalling a list. You are consciously, deliberately trying to replicate every audible feature of the original speaker's delivery in that specific sentence or phrase. This means meticulously matching their speed, how fast or slow they said it. Matching the way their voice rises and falls, that's the intonation contour. Matching where they place emphasis or stress on certain words or syllables within the phrase, and crucially, matching how they might link words together or use reductions, just like we discussed with "what you doing" or I don't know.
So if the speaker connected two words, you try to connect them in the same way. If they used a reduction like gonna instead of going to, you try to say gonna.
Precisely. This focused repetition, pausing, and really trying to imitate the sound precisely helps you become acutely aware of the exact physical movements needed in your mouth, your throat, your diaphragm to produce those specific sounds and rhythms. It's almost like diagnostic practice. You're diagnosing the difference between their sound and your attempt and trying to close that gap.
Okay, so you listen, pause, repeat, aiming for that exact replication. Then step 3 is the actual shadowing part itself. You play the audio clip again, maybe the same sentence or a slightly longer chunk this time, and you speak along at the same time as the native speaker. This feels a bit different from the pause and repeat step. Why the emphasis on simultaneous speaking here? What does that add?
This simultaneous speaking, the core act of shadowing in real time, is where the technique really gains its unique power and effectiveness, according to the source. The source material uses a really effective analogy here to explain why. It compares learning pronunciation and rhythm through shadowing to training your body in the gym.
Ah, the gym analogy. I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah. Think of speaking not just as a mental exercise of recalling words and applying grammar rules, but fundamentally as a physical activity. Your mouth, your tongue, your lips, your jaw, your vocal cords, even the muscles involved in controlling your breath support, these are all physical components, muscles, and coordinated systems that need to be trained to move in new ways, perhaps ways they aren't used to in your native language. They need to learn to form new shapes, to execute complex sequences of sound smoothly and rapidly with the correct timing and airflow required for English.
So shadowing is essentially physical training, like weightlifting or cardio, but specifically for your voice and articulation muscles, getting them fit for English.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it, getting them fit for English.
Yeah.
When you shadow, you are essentially forcing your articulatory muscles and your neurological control over them to work at the pace, with the coordination, and following the specific patterns of a native speaker in real time. You are actively building muscle memory for native-like sounds, rhythms, and intonation contours.
Building muscle memory for speaking, that's a cool concept.
It is. And there's another key benefit to the simultaneous aspect. You're engaged in a constant real-time auditory feedback loop. You're hearing the native speaker's target sound or rhythm in one ear, or metaphorically speaking, and you're hearing your own attempt coming out of your mouth at the same time. This allows your brain and your mouth to make tiny, almost subconscious micro-adjustments milliseconds later, trying to bridge the gap between the target sound and your production.
Ah, so you're constantly comparing and adjusting as you go.
Precisely. It is this constant active comparison combined with a simultaneous physical attempt to replicate the target sounds that makes shadowing incredibly effective at improving pronunciation accuracy, rhythm, intonation, and overall fluency all at once. You're literally training your mouth and your ear to work together in perfect sync for English.
Okay, that explanation really sells the power of shadowing. The source gives a specific and very recognizable example to illustrate this, using a line from the popular American TV show Friends. It's the line Ross famously says, "We were on a break."
Ah, yes, the classic.
Describe what trying to copy that specific line using shadowing would actually involve. It's not just saying the words right.
Oh, definitely not. Anyone who's seen even a little bit of Friends knows that line isn't just spoken calmly. It's delivered with a very specific, often quite exasperated or pleading or highly stressed intonation and rhythm, depending on which time he says it in the show.
Right, it carries a lot of emotion.
Exactly. So when you shadow that line, "We were on a break," you're not merely aiming to say the words "we were on a break" clearly and in the right order. You are attempting to match Ross's, the character's, particular stress pattern, which often falls heavily on "we" and maybe "on" or "break." "We were on a break." You're trying to match his speed, the specific rise and fall of his voice, pitch across the phrase, and crucially, even the emotional quality or tone, that feeling of frustration or justification embedded in that delivery.
So you're copying the performance, not just the script.
You're trying to copy the entire musical phrase, the whole performance package, not just the individual notes, which are the words. You're trying to reproduce that exact intonation contour, that melody, along with the underlying emotion it conveys.
And why is practicing copying that specific, maybe emotional delivery so important for sounding natural? What does that kind of practice actually teach you beyond just saying the words correctly?
It teaches you profoundly important aspects of how English speakers use pitch, stress, and intonation, the music of the language, to convey not just literal meaning, but also emphasis, attitude, emotion, and subtle shades of meaning. Intonation in English is far from just random ups and downs. It's a crucial part of the communication system. It signals questions versus statements. It shows surprise, doubt, certainty, sarcasm, enthusiasm, boredom, you name it.
So it adds all that extra information.
Huge amounts of information. By practicing shadowing iconic or even just clearly delivered emotionally charged lines like this one from the source, you start to learn intuitively how native speakers use their voice, their pitch range, their stress placement, to add these crucial layers of meaning and feeling that go far, far beyond the literal dictionary definition of the words being used.
Like the example you mentioned earlier about "how are you?"
Exactly like that. You learn that saying, "How are you?" with a completely flat, level tone communicates something vastly different, maybe disinterest or boredom, than saying the exact same words with a friendly, rising tone at the end, which signals warmth and genuine inquiry. Shadowing helps you internalize these common, meaningful intonation patterns, these melodies of spoken English, and, just as importantly, it helps you build the physical capability, the vocal flexibility, to reproduce them convincingly yourself.
So it's not just about being understood clearly in a basic sense, but about sounding truly natural and, well, communicative in a richer way, picking up on and being able to use those subtle vocal cues that convey attitude, emotion, and social context. Shadowing sounds like a really hands-on almost, athletic way to train those specific, often overlooked aspects of speaking.
It absolutely is. It provides that vital bridge, that crucial link between hearing and understanding how native speakers sound, including all the rhythm and music, and being able to physically produce those sounds, those rhythms, those intonation patterns yourself with increasing fluidity and accuracy. It's active physical mimicry with a very clear linguistic purpose.
Okay, this makes a lot of sense. So we've covered the crucial skill of observing how native speakers actually sound, going beyond just the words, focusing on connected speech, rhythm, intonation. We've then looked at the powerful active technique of shadowing as a form of physical practice to copy that sound effectively. What's the next key strategy the source material highlights for sounding more natural in our English?
The next major area the source emphasizes is the importance of actively building and, crucially, incorporating a collection of natural phrases, common expressions, and conversational fillers into your own active vocabulary and speech.
Okay, natural phrases and expressions.
Yeah. Native speakers, in any language really, often have conventional, sometimes idiomatic or formulaic ways of saying common things. These might not be the most obvious or a literal translation from another language, or they might simply use common, everyday alternatives to more formal or perhaps slightly stilted textbook phrases. The source points out that learning and actually using these natural expressions makes your English sound significantly more authentic, less like you're mentally translating word for word, and less stiff, or as the source aptly puts it, less robotic.
Avoiding the robotic sound. I think many learners worry about that. So instead of always falling back on the one basic phrase you might have learned initially from, say, chapter 1 of a textbook, the idea is to expand your repertoire to include the real-life variations that people actually use in everyday, spontaneous conversation.
Precisely. It's about having more tools in your conversational toolkit.
The source gives some excellent, really practical examples for expressing agreement. Let's say you want to say, I agree. What are some of those common natural alternatives that the source suggests you might hear or ideally start using yourself?
The source lists several really versatile and common examples. Instead of always defaulting to a slightly formal sounding, I agree, you might very commonly hear native speakers say, or you could start using yourself, expressions like, totally, exactly, or I couldn't agree more.
Totally, exactly. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Okay, those definitely sound more conversational than just I agree sometimes. But do all of these alternatives mean exactly the same thing? Can you just swap them freely in any situation?
Not practically the same, no. And understanding that subtle nuance and meaning or register is really key to using them naturally, which is a point the source implicitly makes by providing these different options rather than just one alternative.
Okay, so what are the differences?
Well, totally. Yeah. Is generally a very casual and often quite enthusiastic way to show agreement. You frequently hear it used among friends or in informal settings to show strong alignment or shared feeling. It's like saying, yes, absolutely 100%.
Got it. Casual, enthusiastic. What about exactly?
Exactly. It's typically used when you strongly agree with a specific point or statement someone has just made. You're affirming the accuracy or truth of what they just said. It implies precision in your agreement. Like, yes, that's precisely the point I was thinking.
Okay, confirming a specific point, and I couldn't agree more.
I couldn't agree more.
Hmm.
It's a slightly more emphatic way of expressing complete agreement. It might be a touch more formal than totally, but it's still very common in conversation. It basically means I agree with you 100% completely. There is no room for disagreement from my side. It's quite strong.
I see. So learning these different options, as the source suggests, provides you with a richer, more nuanced toolkit to express agreement with varying degrees of intensity and formality, suitable for different social contexts. It's not just one size fits all.
Exactly. It allows you to be more precise and more natural in your responses.
That's a great point. It's about learning the subtle shades of meaning and the appropriate context for using them. The source also lists some common alternatives for when you want to say, I don't know. What are those examples?
For the very common situation of not knowing something, instead of just repeating I don't know over and over, the source offers alternatives like I have no idea.
Right.
I'm not sure, to be honest. And the very informal beats me.
Beats me. That one definitely sounds quite different from a simple I don't know. Tell us about the nuances there.
It absolutely does sound different. And again, understanding the context and the subtle connotation is vital for using these naturally, which the source prompts us to consider by providing these varied examples. I have no idea is a very common and versatile alternative. It simply emphasizes that you genuinely lack the information requested. It's a straightforward way to say, I really don't know.
Okay, straightforward emphasis. What about I'm not sure, to be honest?
Adding, to be honest, to I'm not sure,
Yeah.
injects a layer of sincerity or maybe indicates that you've thought about it. But you genuinely can't provide a definite answer. It might imply you wish you knew, or perhaps that you feel slightly bad about not knowing. It can soften the I don't know.
A bit softer, more sincere, perhaps. And the informal beats me.
Beats me.
Hmm.
It's definitely quite informal, yeah. You typically use it in very casual settings, maybe among friends or colleagues you know well. It suggests not only that you don't know the answer, but perhaps that the answer is particularly difficult, mysterious, or even unknowable. It often implies that you're quite stumped by the question, and maybe you don't even think anyone could know the answer easily. It can sometimes be accompanied by a shrug or a tone of slight resignation or dismissal like, who knows, it beats me.
Wow, okay. So much nuance packed into just a few short phrases. These examples, drawn directly from the source material, are fantastic illustrations, I think, because they clearly demonstrate how just by swapping out a basic, perhaps slightly formal or overused textbook phrase like I agree or I don't know, for one of these more natural, common alternatives, your English can instantly sound more authentic, more fluid, more conversational, more like it's genuinely used by native speakers in their actual daily lives.
Precisely. It elevates your language from being merely grammatically correct, which is important, to being idiomatic, appropriate, and natural sounding within the flow of conversation. It's about acquiring and confidently using the common currency, the everyday vocabulary and phrasing of real spoken English.
Okay, so we've covered training your ear through observant listening, practicing your production through powerful techniques like shadowing, and building your lexicon of these natural expressions. The source material, with its very practical focus, also takes care to point out potential traps, common mistakes or tendencies that learners often fall into when they're actively trying to sound more native, which can paradoxically actually hold them back or make them sound less natural.
Yes. Understanding these common errors is incredibly important. It's like knowing where the potholes are on the road. Identifying what not to do helps you avoid frustrating plateaus in your learning journey and ensures you're focusing your valuable practice time and energy effectively on the strategies that actually work towards building genuine naturalness, rather than accidentally reinforcing counterproductive habits.
That's a great way to think about it, avoiding the pothole. Okay, let's look at the first mistake or pitfall the source highlights. What is it?
The first major pitfall mentioned is the temptation to try and speak too fast, too soon. The source points out that many learners mistakenly equate speaking very quickly with being fluent or sounding native.
Yeah, that seems intuitive. Native speakers often sound fast, so.
Right. They hear native speakers talking at a certain pace and think, okay, the key must be to increase my speed. I need to talk faster. But the source argues that's not the whole story, and focusing solely on increasing your speed, especially early on, can actually be detrimental to sounding natural.
How so? Why is speed not the primary goal?
Because, as we discussed earlier when we talked about connected speech and rhythm, native speakers might sound fast, but a large part of that perception of speed comes not just from raw words per minute, but from their smooth rhythm, the efficient linking and reduction of sounds between words, and their effective use of natural pauses and intonation patterns. It's about the overall flow, not just the velocity.
Ah, okay. So it's the smoothness and efficiency that creates the impression of speed, as much as the actual speed itself.
Exactly. And if you try to force yourself to speak rapidly before you have first mastered that smooth flow, that clear articulation within the flow, and that natural rhythm, what happens?
What does happen? How does it make you sound?
Well, it can often make you sound rushed, unclear, maybe tense, and potentially even harder for native speakers to understand comfortably than if you spoke a little more slowly but clearly. If you try to force out words rapidly before your mouth and tongue have built necessary muscle memory for the correct production of English sounds, reductions, and connections at speed, your words can easily become jumbled, swallowed, or distorted. You sacrifice clarity for speed, which is usually a bad trade-off in communication.
Okay, clarity gets sacrificed.
Yeah. The crucial point the source makes is that focusing on achieving smooth, clear, well-articulated speech with a natural, relaxed rhythm should be your primary goal initially. Speed is something that will naturally increase over time as your foundational fluency improves, as your comfort level with the language grows, and as your physical control over the sounds and rhythms becomes more automatic. Start with achieving smoothness and clarity. Natural speed will follow organically from that foundation. Don't chase speed for its own sake.
That is a really valuable distinction and a super important piece of advice from the source. Get the foundation right first. Okay, what's another common mistake the source calls out that learners should be wary of?
Another significant pitfall the source highlights is the inappropriate or excessive use of slang.
Ah, slang. That can be tricky territory.
It really can be. The source acknowledges that learning some slang can certainly be fun, and using it appropriately can contribute to sounding more current, more informal, or more connected in certain situations. But it also correctly warns that misusing slang or overusing it can very easily backfire and make your English sound unnatural, forced, perhaps even awkward or out of place.
The source uses the specific example, yo, bro, that's lit, to illustrate this point.
Yes. And while a phrase like "that's lit" might be perfectly common and appropriate in very specific informal contexts, maybe amongst certain groups of teenagers or young adults talking amongst themselves about something they find exciting,
Right.
dropping it into every other sentence you speak, or using it in a formal setting like a business meeting or a job interview, or trying to string together a whole bunch of trendy slang terms that don't really fit the context or your own personal style.
Well, that can sound incredibly unnatural and maybe even a bit cringy.
Yeah, I can imagine. Trying too hard. Exactly. Slang is highly context dependent. Its appropriateness is dictated by factors like who you are talking to, where you are, the overall formality of the situation, and even your age and relationship with the other person. Using slang incorrectly is, as the source implies, a bit like wearing casual beach flip-flops with a formal evening gown or a tuxedo. It simply doesn't fit the situation, it clashes, and it sends the wrong social signal about your understanding of the social context and norms.
So the takeaway on slang is...
The source implies that you should approach learning and using slang cautiously. Learn it primarily by observing how and when native speakers use specific terms naturally in context, rather than just memorizing lists of slang words from a dictionary or website and then trying to sprinkle them randomly into your conversations. Pay attention to who uses what slang and where and with whom. Be an observer first.
Okay, so prioritize smoothness and clarity over forced speed, and be extremely mindful of context and appropriateness when considering using slang. What is the final, crucial mistake or pitfall that the source emphasizes we should avoid?
This final pitfall is absolutely fundamental, and it ties directly back to the physical nature of speaking that we discussed earlier with shadowing.
Hmm.
The mistake is simply not practicing speaking out loud enough.
Not speaking enough, just listening isn't sufficient.
Exactly. The source stresses that many learners, understandably, dedicate a significant amount of time to listening activities, consuming podcasts, watching movies, listening to music in English. And these activities are absolutely necessary and hugely beneficial for building vocabulary, comprehension, and getting exposure to natural speech patterns. We've already emphasized the importance of listening observation.
Right.
However, the mistake is not balancing this vital receptive practice, listening, with sufficient productive practice, meaning actively physically speaking the language aloud.
And why is consistent speaking practice so fundamentally critical to sounding natural, according to the source? Why can't you just learn by listening intently?
Because, as we discussed with the gym analogy for shadowing, speaking is fundamentally a physical skill. It involves the complex, rapid, and precise coordination of multiple parts of your vocal apparatus: lungs, vocal cords, tongue, lips, jaw, soft palate. Listening primarily trains your ear and your brain to understand the sounds, rhythms, and patterns of native speech. It helps you recognize them when you hear them. It builds your comprehension.
Okay.
But listening by itself does not effectively train your mouth, tongue, lips, and vocal cords to actually produce those often complex and unfamiliar English sounds, those tricky reductions, and those fluid connected sequences correctly, smoothly, and efficiently. If you only listen, your brain might learn intellectually how a particular word or phrase should ideally sound in natural speech, but your physical ability, the muscle memory and coordination required to make your voice actually produce those sounds accurately and automatically, won't develop sufficiently.
So the muscles don't get trained just by listening.
Precisely. You must engage in active speaking practice, whether that takes the form of shadowing or reading dialogues or scripts aloud, or practicing specific pronunciation points, or actively trying to use new phrases and vocabulary in real or simulated conversations, even if it's just talking to yourself while you're doing chores. You need to be physically making the sounds to build the necessary muscle memory and coordination. Without regular speaking practice, your progress towards achieving natural pronunciation and fluency will be severely limited, simply because the physical mechanics of your speech haven't been adequately trained. The muscles literally need the exercise to get stronger, more flexible, and more coordinated for the specific demands of English sounds and rhythms.
That's a really stark reminder. You can't just think your way to better pronunciation, you have to physically do it. So, to quickly summarize these key pitfalls from the source material. Number 1, avoid the trap of trying to force speed before you have built a solid foundation of smoothness and clarity. Number 2, be very careful and observant about the context and appropriateness when using slang. Don't overdo it or use it randomly. And number 3, absolutely ensure that you are consistently practicing speaking English out loud, treating it as a necessary physical exercise for your voice, not just an optional extra.
Exactly right. Recognizing and actively avoiding these common traps, as highlighted clearly by the source, frees you up. It allows you to focus your energy and your practice time more effectively on implementing the proactive strategies that truly build naturalness, like the detailed listening for connected speech, the active practice through shadowing, and the deliberate learning and use of natural phrases.
Right. Focus on what works, avoid what doesn't. Now, the source material also expands our view a little bit, moving beyond just the, let's say, mechanical aspects of sound production and vocabulary choice. It touches on how our speaking style is actually perceived by others, linking it interestingly to cultural expectation and social dynamics in English-speaking contexts. It suggests that the way you speak, not just the words you choose, but your delivery, your tone, your rhythm, can significantly affect how people perceive certain attributes about you, like your level of confidence, your sincerity, or even how friendly you seem.
This is a really insightful and important point that the source brings up, moving into the social dimension of language use. Your tone of voice, your intonation patterns, the melody of your speech, your rhythm, and even your use of common features like reductions aren't merely about being technically understood on a literal level. They carry substantial social information and significantly influence how you are received and perceived by others in a conversation. This is why intonation, the musicality of speech, is such a crucial element that the source references multiple times throughout its advice. It's doing more than just marking grammar.
How exactly does intonation carry this social information? The source brings back the simple "how are you" example to illustrate this specific point about perception. Can you elaborate on that?
Right. Let's think about that very common, simple question. How are you? Imagine someone saying it in a completely flat, monotone voice with no real rise or fall in pitch, perhaps speaking each word slowly and deliberately with equal stress. How are you?
Okay, I can picture that. Sounds a bit cold.
Exactly. Even if the words themselves are grammatically perfect and the pronunciation of each individual sound is clear in isolation, that kind of flat, monotonous delivery in English can very easily come across as disinterested, maybe bored, possibly robotic, perhaps even slightly suspicious or unwelcoming in many typical social contexts. It doesn't invite connection.
Right.
Now, contrast that with saying the exact same word, how are you? But this time with a natural, friendly, rising intonation at the end, maybe with a slight peak on, how are you? With the pitch going up noticeably.
Yeah, sounds much warmer.
As the source points out, that upward inflection and the generally warmer tone that often accompanies it immediately sounds more engaging, more genuinely curious, friendlier, and more open. It signals warmth, interest, and a desire for connection or interaction. This simple contrast vividly illustrates how intonation isn't just about marking something as a question grammatically, though it often does that too. It's a powerful tool for conveying your attitude, your emotional state, and your social intent. It significantly impacts whether someone feels you are engaged, polite, approachable, or welcoming.
That simple "how are you" example, when you break down the intonation and its social impact like that, really makes the point incredibly clearly. The way you say something can truly be as important, or sometimes even more important, than what you say in terms of how you are perceived by others.
Absolutely. It's a key part of pragmatic competence in a language.
The source also mentions some specific features of natural spoken English, like reductions, particularly highlighting a couple of very common ones often associated with American English, though they appear elsewhere too.
Yes, the source specifically points out that in casual conversational American English, and increasingly in other varieties too, phrases like going to very frequently become reduced to gonna, and want to often becomes reduced to wanna.
Gonna and wanna, we hear those constantly.
We do, and the source highlights that learning about these isn't solely about deciding whether or not to incorporate them into your own speech, although using them appropriately in casual contexts can certainly help you sound more integrated and natural. But perhaps even more crucially, learning to recognize these common reductions is absolutely vital for simply understanding native speakers when they talk at a natural pace.
Why is recognition so vital?
Because native speakers use forms like gonna and wanna constantly, almost automatically in everyday, rapid, informal speech. If your ear is only tuned to listen for the full unreduced forms going to and want to, you might genuinely miss or misinterpret a significant portion of what's being said in a natural conversation. Your brain might stumble trying to process I'm going to go if it's only expecting I am going to go.
So understanding these common reductions isn't just about tweaking your own pronunciation if you choose to. It's actually a fundamental listening skill needed for decoding fast, natural speech accurately.
Precisely. They are integral, unavoidable features of that smooth, connected conversational flow that the source emphasizes throughout its strategies for sounding natural. Ignoring them or not being aware of them means you're essentially opting out of understanding a significant chunk of how the language is actually spoken in many common informal contexts. Mastering the recognition of these reduces the cognitive load when you're listening, allowing you to focus more on the meaning, and it also helps your own speech flow more naturally if and when you choose to use them appropriately yourself.
Okay, so bringing together these insightful points from the source on the interplay between language, culture, and perception. Pay close attention not just to words, but to the tone, the rhythm, the intonation of native speakers, because these elements carry significant social meaning and heavily influence how you are perceived, with intonation being particularly important for conveying friendliness, interest, and confidence. And secondly, actively learn to recognize common reductions like gonna and wanna, and ideally practice hearing and maybe even saying them yourself, not just for the sake of potentially using them, but fundamentally to improve your ability to understand native speakers when they use them naturally all the time.
It's really about recognizing that achieving proficiency in a language isn't just a purely technical skill of knowing grammar rules and vocabulary list. It's deeply interwoven with successful social interaction and understanding cultural context. And your vocal delivery, how you sound, plays a truly significant role in navigating that interaction effectively.
This has been a really practical and I think incredibly detailed deep dive into how to approach this often elusive goal of sounding more natural in English. We've drawn these powerful techniques and insights directly from the source material we've been discussing. Let's just quickly recap the main points.
Good idea.
We started with the foundational importance of observing how words are actually spoken by native speakers, actively listening for connected speech, for reductions like gonna, for the rhythm and flow.
Then we explored that very effective active practice technique, shadowing, understanding it as vital physical training for your voice and articulation muscles, using that gym analogy.
Right. Then we looked at the significant value of deliberately learning and strategically using those natural, real-life phrases and expressions that native speakers commonly use, moving beyond the basic textbook equivalents like using totally or beats me.
And we also highlighted those common pitfalls that the source warns us to be aware of and actively avoid, things like prioritizing raw speed over smoothness and clarity, or misusing or overusing slang inappropriately, and the critical mistake of not getting enough actual speaking practice.
Don't forget the speaking practice. And finally, we touched on how your speaking style, particularly your intonation and use of natural features like reductions, impacts how you're perceived socially and culturally.
It truly is a comprehensive approach outlined in the source, isn't it? Systematically training your ear to hear the subtle details, training your mouth and vocal apparatus to reproduce them accurately and fluently, while simultaneously equipping yourself with the actual vocabulary and phrasing used in everyday conversation. It's about building both the underlying mechanics and the practical application together.
Exactly. And the source material doesn't just leave you with all this valuable information in theory, though. It ends, very practically, with a call to action. It gives you, the listener, a concrete challenge task to put this into practice right away. So, here is your challenge for today, listener, drawing straight from the source's recommendations for applying this knowledge effectively.
Okay, here it is. Step 1. Go and choose a short English video or podcast clip, something that genuinely interests you. This is important for motivation. Selecting something you actually like listening to will make the practice much more engaging and sustainable in the long run. It could be a favorite scene from a TV show you enjoy, maybe a short news clip, or a segment from a podcast you follow regularly. Keep it short, maybe a minute or two.
Okay, find your short, interesting clip. Step 2. Pick just one sentence, or maybe even a very short phrase from that clip. Perhaps choose one you notice had particularly interesting connected speech, or a distinctive intonation pattern you'd like to try copying. Listen to it carefully, maybe a couple of times. Then pause the audio and shadow it. Repeat that single sentence or phrase out loud exactly as you heard it, trying your very best to match the native speaker's speed, their intonation contour, the melody, and their rhythm.
And don't aim for perfection immediately. Just focus on the imitation. Do this specific sentence maybe a few times, listening and repeating until you feel you're getting just a little bit closer to capturing their sound and their flow. It's about the process of trying, not instant mastery.
Okay, shadow one sentence multiple times. And step 3.
Step 3 is about activation. Make a conscious effort sometime today, or maybe this week, to try and use just one new natural phrase or alternative expression that you learned about today. Perhaps one of the options we discussed for saying, I agree, like totally, or exactly, or one for, I don't know, like I have no idea, or even beats me if the context is right.
Where can you use it?
Well, this could be with a language exchange partner, if you have one online or in person. Or if you're feeling a bit brave, maybe try it with a native English speaker you interact with in your daily life. Or even if those options aren't available right now, you can just practice using it aloud to yourself, perhaps imagining a conversation scenario. The key point is to move from passive recognition of the phrase to active production and use.
Right. Take it from theory into practice. These might seem like quite small steps: find a clip, shadow one sentence, try one new phrase. But as the source material implies, these kinds of small, consistent, focused actions, observing carefully, attempting to copy physically, actively using new phrasing in context, are precisely how you build these complex skills and gradually, incrementally move towards sounding more natural and fluent over time. It's all about that consistent, focused practice adding up.
Absolutely. It's about incremental progress through deliberate practice, not searching for some magic bullet. And the source material even offers a nice little reflective question to help you personalize this learning journey further. Consider this, listener, and maybe even think about sharing your answer with others if you're part of a learning group or community. Who is your favorite English speaker to learn from?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah. Perhaps it's a particular actor whose delivery you really admire, or a podcaster whose voice you find engaging. Maybe a YouTuber you follow for content you enjoy. Or it could even be someone you know personally whose English sounds great to you. Thinking specifically about why you like their speaking style. What is it precisely about their sound, their rhythm, their phrasing that attracts you or sounds good to your ear? Doing that reflection can help you focus your observational listening and your shadowing practice much more effectively on the specific qualities you want to emulate.
That's a great tip. Make it personal. Find your own role models. That definitely helps with motivation, too.
For sure. And, reflecting on everything we've discussed in this deep dive, pulling these threads together from the source, it's truly fascinating, isn't it, how these seemingly small, often quite intricate details, like a slight change in how two sounds link together between words, or a subtle rise or fall in pitch at the end of a phrase, or the seemingly simple choice between saying a standard "I don't know" and a more casual "beats me." How all these tiny elements collectively build the complex and rich picture of what we perceive as a natural-sounding speaker.
Yeah, it's like a mosaic made of tiny pieces.
Exactly. It represents a level of language proficiency that moves significantly beyond just simple grammatical correctness and having the right vocabulary words. It encompasses the rhythm, the musicality, the prosody of the language, and that deep, often subconscious layer of social cues, cultural appropriateness, and authentic, spontaneous usage that's embedded within the way the language is actually spoken by its native users. It's the difference between knowing the notes and playing the music.
That's a powerful and really insightful thought, playing the music. I like that. And building on the source's ideas about perception and the crucial social dimension of language, here's perhaps a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over as you go about your day and continue your English learning journey. Think about a native English speaker whose speaking style you particularly admire, maybe the one you just identified. When you really listen closely to them, is it just the specific words they use that makes them sound good? Or is there something equally, maybe even more impactful about how they say those words, the particular tone of voice, their rhythm, the apparent confidence they project, the friendliness that comes across?
It's usually more than just the words, isn't it?
Almost always, I think. So the question to ponder is, how might actively focusing on these more subtle, auditory, musical elements of speech, using the specific strategies and insights we've pulled from our source material today, like targeted listening and shadowing, how might that focus change not just how native-like or natural you eventually sound, but perhaps even deepen your overall connection to the language itself, and maybe even enhance your interactions with the people who speak it naturally?
That's a wonderful question to leave people with. Keep observing. Keep listening like that linguistic detective we talked about. Keep practicing speaking aloud. Remember, those vocal muscles need their workout. And just keep exploring the wonderful, intricate nuances of real spoken English.
Absolutely. Every focused listening session you do, every single attempt you make at shadowing a sentence, every time you bravely try using a new natural phrase in conversation, each one of those steps moves you incrementally closer to your goal of sounding and, just as importantly, feeling more natural and confident when you speak English.
Keep talking. Keep experimenting. Don't be afraid to make mistakes along the way. And most importantly, try to enjoy the journey of uncovering the natural music of English.